Welcome, everyone, to Beyond Tech, where innovation meets insights.
We're your hosts, Jackie Splatt and Cassie Gardner. We bring curiosity, clarity, and a passion for technology-driven storytelling to every conversation. Cassie is the Corporate Development Director for eTech Group. Previously, she held engineering and project management roles. She was also one of our first guests on Beyond Tech, and today is joining us as a co-host for this episode.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I'm definitely looking forward to talking about digital twins because there's something that are really bringing new things to the industrial automation space, and they are giving us a way to enhance the physical assets we work with often and improve how those go using our digital tooling. And some stats we wanted to share that we got from a couple sources like Hexagon and Industrial Sage are that adoption is growing fast. So there's been a 36% annual deployment growth in industrial sectors of digital twins. The market has exploded from 21 billion in 2025 to nearly 150 billion expected in 2030. And the results are pretty impactful. So about 50% faster development time, 20% fewer unplanned stoppages, and 20% higher promise fulfillment. So digital twins, to say the least, they can have a big impact on your business. And we're looking forward to learning about how they help efficiency, predictive maintenance, sustainability, and improve our decision-making for manufacturers out there today.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this episode as well. And with us today, we have Cole Schweitzer. Cole is a principal full stack developer and head of advanced software at eTech Group. Cole leads the development of digital twin platforms that transform manufacturing, blending his indie game development roots with expertise in Unreal Engine and Unity 3D to create immersive data-driven solutions for industrial automation. As Cassie said, I'm excited for this conversation. Cole and I have worked together on a few other marketing things. He's helped with some articles and led a webinar earlier, and I just always learn a lot. So with that, let's get into it, and let's start somewhat basic for everyone. Cole, can you explain in simple terms what is a digital twin and how does it differ from traditional simulation models?
So funny enough, simulation is a type of digital twin that we've talked about before. I broadly categorize digital twins into three different types. So you got your simulation twin. These are going to be like your offline digital commissioning tools, something like an Emulate 3D. It can be hooked up to a data source like a PLC. It can be just isolated, but you really don't have anything physical behind it. It's just magical ones and zeros. Then you have your data twins. And this is where a lot of the heavy lifting comes in, because your data twins is all about collecting that data from your lowest device all the way up to your enterprise solutions. So your discrete IO, your PLC controls, your SCADA systems, ERP, and it's this end-to-end digital representation of your entire facility, production line, or your enterprise. All of it kind of comes together as one, so that you can represent in a digital spreadsheet, if you will, digital database, your whole business. And then you have your visual twins, which is always the more attractive and stunning version of this, seeing things move in 3D, seeing your production line move and animate just like if you were standing in front of it. It's always flashier. But it really, in order to achieve something like that, you really have to have that data twin first.
Nice. That's awesome, Cole. I'm just curious, if you think about digital twins, why do you think they're becoming a priority, or why are we seeing the industry adopt them?
As we move away from the legacy tooling that we've had for decades at this point, we're getting more cutting edge, more like Silicon Valley, if you will. We have new tools that open up themselves, like MQTT as a standard. And with the advent of that more advanced tooling, we can do more advanced things. And the old tools are usually really hard to work with. Just troubleshooting a PLC program can be time consuming, can be difficult. The knowledge transfer that's often involved and get a specialty engineer out. It's time consuming. It's a higher skill cap. But when you have these tools that are robustly interconnected, your time to develop a new program or troubleshoot an issue, or even just noticing trends on the line becomes so much easier to accomplish with these.
Yeah, one of the early examples that if anyone would like to take a listen and watch, we have our webinar on digital twins. And I know Nick shared one of the first concepts for digital twin was I think, and yes, correct me if I'm wrong, Cole, if I misunderstood, was in the Apollo 13 space shuttle launch. And can you kind of go into and explain a little bit of how much has changed since that kind of first development of it?
Yeah, I probably won't do as good of a job as Nick did. He did a great job presenting that. Yeah, go watch our webinar. But so the Apollo 13 is what we would call an analog twin. And the important difference from there to here is they essentially built two Apollo 13 shuttles. They had one that stayed at NASA and they had one that went up, to the moon. And so when something went wrong with the one that was in flight, they could run simulations and try a bunch of things on their physical one that they had still at NASA. So that's more of an analog twin. With a digital twin, it's basically the same thing, except you get rid of the physical duplication. So it's all just in the computer itself. You don't need to build a whole nother shuttle in order to get the benefits of it. So that is the difference from there to here is we took what was physical and it's just pure digital.
So I'm just curious, Cole, as you think about, developing digital twins and simulations, one of the challenges that I've worked with clients in the past who have put together simulation environments for their manufacturing facilities and managing the change that's happening on the plant floor and making sure that gets kind of moved into or remains current with the simulation environment or the digital twin. Do you have a lens on that? Like some of the mechanics around that?
Yeah. So it's going to depend on how you derive the visual. If you're talking about a visual, it gets challenging to line up the CAD that's ever changing with the deployed version. It's easier to change CAD than it is digital twin oftentimes. So you have to make that pipeline, which can be challenging. There's a lot of tools out there now because we're in this rapid iteration cycle with digital twins. So a lot of new and upcoming technologies that solve these problems, but it has been a problem in the past to manage that. If you're talking about the non-digital version with things like UNS, a well-structured, well-deployed UNS system is pretty agile in terms of it can be flexible, right? So, gone are the days of, hard coding this relationship from the physical line to the digital enterprise. It's much more fluid in how it picks up that data and shares it across your enterprise. So you don't have that overhead that you used to.
So just for those who might not know UNS, Unified Namespace, could you describe a little bit what that is and just maybe touch on how that works?
Yeah, fair question. We often instead use the term digital backbone, and UNS is a methodology it's called a unified namespace. It unifies the data of your enterprise kind of all in one hood, if you will. That methodology, some people don't like. It works in certain enterprises better than other enterprises. You also have like data fabric or digital fabric. There's a bunch of different terms for it. But the idea is the digital backbone. The idea is that you have this way of collecting data, standardizing it, and disseminating it through all of your into like a digital marketplace from end to end. That's really what it is.
And okay, I'm thinking about a couple different things. I think about UNS really as like almost a philosophy, like this is how you think about the data in your manufacturing environment in your plant. So you structure it all so it's kind of clean and easily usable. How does that tie in with like MQTT or publish and subscribe data consumption? Could you touch on that just a little bit? Because I think this all is foundational for the digital twin infrastructure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. MQTT, it's like UNS is a philosophy. MQTT is just a protocol. The purpose of the MQTT is to get your data out. What's nice about MQTT is, as you mentioned, it's a publish subscribe model, meaning in days of old, you would have to have some kind of application that's constantly asking a database, do you have updated information over and over and over on millisecond polls or sometimes less. And it's a really heavy burden on your network, and it's a heavy burden on the machines that are hosting these data sources. With MQTT and other publish subscribe models, nobody is asking anybody else for data. They're just saying, hey, I'm ready. Whenever you have data, go ahead and send it to me, and I'm ready to take it. And so it really offloads a lot of networking burden and processing burden. But MQTT is just one of the protocols that you can use. Another one really prevalent one is Kafka. Very similar concept, slightly different implementation, but there's tons of them out there. MQTT by far is the most popular.
So it's kind of like you build your digital twin, you're thinking about, hey, we're recreating the physical world, but digitally, so that's cheaper, it's easier for us to manipulate, and it's all built kind of on this core infrastructure that if you do it right, managing change in the real world as your plant evolves, as you install new equipment, it becomes simpler because the Lego blocks are sort of in place. You just have to drop them in, and some of the other cascading down the line changes will happen automatically. Is that sort of a fair way to think about it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one really common methodology is to use ISA 95 in your MQTT. And so in that standard, you have a lot of flexibility, and it's basically, if anybody who's listening isn't familiar with ISA 95, it's basically a way to uniquely identify a data point somewhere in your entire business across multiple sites, across multiple production lines. So like, how do I know it's from this photo eye in Kansas on line 47, right?
Yeah.
The ISA 5 standard kind of helps you do that at a global scale, right? So that's one thing that's come out. And if you follow that standard, and like you're saying with Lego pieces, if you drop in a new photo eye, well, you have that new photo eye, it follows the ISA 95 standard. Anybody who's consuming that knows how to consume it. You don't need to do anything downstream.
When a facility or a manufacturer is looking to adopt a digital twin or implement one, what can the people internally trying to sell it, what can they look at to determine a ROI on it?
Factor. So if this is your first foray into digital transformation and modernize your facility, there's going to be a lot going on. There's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of new ways of thinking and working. So it's probably going to be a little bit heavier of a lift to start from zero. But if you've already gone through that transformation process, if you're starting to adopt these practices like MQTT and UNS, you're probably most of the way there already. It's just maybe we will come in and introduce some standards that make your life a whole lot easier, or maybe some off-the-shelf technologies that make your life easier.
So with the digital, I guess to develop a digital twin, you need to have all of your equipment already getting the data to build the digital twin from, correct?
Yeah, correct. If you're not there, we can get you there.
And so for the folks who are trying, like Jackie mentioned, the folks who are saying, hey, I want a digital twin for my facility, but I've got to get my executive leadership to buy off on that. What do you see our clients using Cole to help their organizations understand the value? Like, what are the main drivers that create that return and that value for our client?
Yeah, there's two immediate and probably one perspective, right? So the two immediate is the reduction of downtime. Everywhere that we've implemented digital twins, the downtime has either been cut to like 10% of what it was or completely eliminated. And then support. Support is a huge factor. If something's going on or going wrong, not even that necessarily that causes downtime, but it's behaving abnormally. Getting that expert on the line and working with them is just a cinch once you have a digital twin, because you don't have to stop what you're doing. You don't have to arrange travel. They can just fire up their laptop from their office dates away and they can help you. Right? It's that interconnectivity. The other is, especially with the advent of machine learning algorithms and now LLMs, the ability to incorporate analytics and predictive analytics is not necessarily easy, but it's so much more feasible than it ever was. So we actually had this real world. One of our clients that implemented a digital twin, they had these electromagnetic motors and they kept burning out. Every week they'd go through 3 motors, and these are, $3,000 motors each. So you can imagine how that piles up really quickly over the course of a year. And once they had adopted the practices of UNS and they had their digital twin, they were actually able to see what was very confusing and hard to find, going through thousands of textual logs to maybe find it. It was just presented front and center to them. And that error just went away because they were able to find the underlying root cause and fix the real issue instead of just servicing the motor. So that's a huge cost savings driver. And not even that the digital twin necessarily is going to make you money, but it's going to save you so much on the day-to-day. Operation lines becomes a lot easier just because you have this portal, this intelligent, like ready to use, easy to understand portal into everything in your facility. It's a huge quality of life change.
When a facility already has a digital twin implemented, how can they help reduce the downtime and then, like you said, like improve the predictive maintenance that they're able to see just what's going on?
Yeah, they can see what's going on. And with traditional tools, it's kind of hard to get there sometimes, especially if you're looking at PLC, like trying to capture that perfect trend over time, right in the window where the issue happens. It can be tricky. And there's been days where we've worked with people to try to find a root cause where once we have that UNS and digital twin, it's right there. It's front and center. It's ready to call up at your fingertips. It's so much easier.
Yeah, I was saying it makes sense. It's nice to know that, like you said, opening a laptop is the barrier to getting help versus like getting on an airplane and flying someone, in person. Sometimes you have to do that because sometimes it really is an equipment issue, but having the digital twin, you've got the ability to understand and drive towards root causes of the issue without necessarily having to physically access the equipment. And then you also get the benefits like you and Jackie were touching on with predictive maintenance. You have the data available to kind of figure out what's going on.
And like quicker fix, less downtime, more time to be producing whatever product they're trying to to move through.
Exactly. More Skittles for me.
I guess. Cole, can you share a real world success story that you've seen where the client implemented a digital twin and they were able to see the results?
Yeah, the motor one's probably my favorite, which I already touched on, but the other one that I always like to talk about is the command center. So one of our partners they ended up deploying the digital twin worldwide. So they had stuff in Japan and Canada and Germany and Spain, all over the US, Mexico. And they had a room where they just bought a bunch of flat screen TVs and posted them on floor to ceiling, every single wall in the place. And that's where they kept their core expert engineering team. And so at any time, they could just look up and see exactly how their production lines are running across their whole enterprise. And what was really cool to see over the years that we worked with them is they started to notice like visual trends. So they didn't even have to click on any of the machines to get more data. They could just see how machines were moving in the twin. And there was one situation where they had a manual box loading. So like a person was sitting there loading in boxes, and they knew that if one of the carts that they had to carry the boxes sat at this one spot for too long, the line was going to go down in 20 minutes. There was no, at that time, there was no intelligence behind it. They just knew that whenever they saw that visual trend, exactly what was going to happen 20 minutes from now. So they could just jump on a phone and say, hey, we need more boxes at this location. And they would prevent downtime that way. Now, as it matured, we could automate that, right? We could start adding in those machine learning algorithms and predictive maintenance to just automate that alarming and heads up display.
So the engineers all sitting in the room actually saw, they just like noticed like, hey, whenever I see this, like I happen to notice 20 minutes later, there's a problem. So that's really cool. They just like saw the pattern. And like I said, that gives you the potential to then get more sophisticated about your process, and you got the underlying data. That's really fun. That's a fun story.
Well, they've got everything for all the different locations too. So you don't have to have people just sharing information from location to location. They've got it all in one place, so that's
the learning is shared. Yeah.
Automatically shared without I said phone call or email.
And they had a whole phone pool set up too. So it's like if an engineer knows something, they just call the line. If the line's having issues, they just called the command center, but the command center already had the digital twin up. So they probably already knew what was happening. It was a really cool setup.
And how much of I'm curious, just in the command center, like they had the digital twin element, but they also had a live view into the actual plant floor. Is that accurate, Cole?
Yeah. They had DVR cameras as well.
And so and maybe they have like a remote viewing of like the thin clients or whatever. Like you're looking at the actual live data on the screens. You've got video of the floor, and then you have the digital twin running in parallel in this command center. So could you speak to, or do you have knowledge of how often they were spending time looking at the plant floor versus the digital twin? Were they like sometimes tweaking things in the digital twin? Like what did that look like?
Their time was almost exclusively spent in the digital twin. So they had the cameras, but they didn't really use them that much. The only time they used them, so one thing that's very difficult to model, especially if you think about like CPG, they have a lot of moving physical parts. One thing that's difficult to model is if that bottle that's sitting on a conveyor is just like a millimeter out of position and it misaligns with the machine crushes the bottle, which happens. It's really difficult to model that in a digital twin, right? It's not impossible, but it is difficult. And so a lot of times when they notice an error, they're like, I think a bottle, like there might be an actual infringement, a physical issue. And so they would go to the DVRs to check that out. But other than situations like that, there were times 100% the digital twin.
Okay, interesting. Would they sometimes like try out, hey, we think the line might run more effectively if we change X, and then they would, test that in the digital twin before deploying it to the plant in this particular scenario, or was that not really how they were using the twin in this case?
With this particular client that I've been talking about, no, they didn't use it that way. However, we have another partner that we do, and they focus more on the digital commissioning portion of digital twins. And they had, it was a food and beverage client, and they would come up with a new cooking process. And so normally they would have to spin up like a $10 million line just to see if their cooking process worked. And if it doesn't work, they tear it all out, they start over. Well, with things like Emulate 3D and similar tools, we could do all of that digitally. And so we could save them $10 million just by doing digital commissioning. Line's already proven out, or at least proven out enough where the concept works. And maybe you're just adjusting parameters once you do the full install.
That's good. Yeah, cool. That's very cool. A compelling story for sure. I want to get into that. I apologize, I'm going a little off script, but I'm curious about this. This is a burning question I have from my own background. So my background is life sciences, and most of the engineering work I did was in that space. And I have a client that was probably on, like, we put in a simulation environment for them that was a mirror of their, effectively what they were operating as a DCS. It was a mirror of their DCS. And we were using that simulation environment to do things like factory acceptance testing and things of that nature. Probably this was 10, 15 years ago, like in that time frame. So I was curious about two things. I was curious if you have a lens on how digital twin fits in the life sciences space. I'm curious what has changed from a technology perspective, like 10, 15 years ago versus now. And also, like, I don't know how much life sciences background you have, but if you could speak to validation and where a digital twin fits in that space.
Yeah, funny enough, my experience is on the other side. It's more about like the actual physical product conveyance and robots and all that kind of stuff, the fun visual stuff. But I have started working recently with one of our life sciences partners, and it's kind of a different world, not only in terms of the validation process, but their needs, right? And this is where I first came up with the concept or the term of data twin, is because they don't have any moving parts. There are these huge stationary vats, and all of the quote unquote moving parts is cellular biology essentially. And so getting a physical lens on that is really not worth trying, but you can derive data from it. You know, they have all of their equipment that they can take measurements from. And so once you have these measurements hooked up and you have like automated reads going, and that can then feed into other things like intelligence. One of the products we worked with was called Base 2, and it's a really interesting machine learning library that, given like a spectrometer reading, can predict yield. And so once you have this whole pipeline, again, going back to UNS, that digital backbone of end-to-end emulation, essentially just of your data, that's where the life sciences is going to excel.
So in this case, for this particular client, were you doing a more traditional controls or automation project, or were you doing a digital twin project for them? Cool.
We were doing something actually entirely unrelated. They were trying to digitize their business process, which is kind of the start of a digital transformation UNS journey. And they did end up picking up some UNS to facilitate this. And that's where they really got their taste. It's like, man, once we go down this path, it makes all these possibilities reasonable to pursue now. And that's where we started getting to spectrometer, mounting cameras to do like automated visual validation, like parts and parts placement. Yeah, it was really cool.
It is cool. So it wasn't necessarily a digital twin, but it was looking at digital transformation of like major business processes. So you're predicting yield was part of that. And you needed the data twin to be able to predict the yield and look at these business processes because the yield was a key input. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in some ways, it's like a little mini digital twin on this piece of the process.
Yeah, it's tough doing digital twins for so long. Even when I go and do work that aren't on digital twins, my brain is, how do I make this a digital twin? And all of my experience to date, I couldn't, right? Until we had the concept of a data twin versus a visual twin.
Nice. And you mentioned Base 2 as a product you use to help with that. One of my parts of my question was, how do you think the technology has advanced in the last 10 years or so, or has there been major advancements that you think make now a particularly compelling time to invest in a digital twin? What's your take on the change?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we've always had a decent amount of technology, though it's usually been behind the curve compared to like the Silicon Valley technology, right? And so oftentimes we've had these like silos of technology where if you have something like Rockwell products work good with Rockwell products, but don't really play outside of Rockwell. And you have that for all kind of vendors, a lot of these black box issues. But now, because of all of the advancements that we're making and all the standards that we're adopting industry wide, it's broadening that scope, and it's getting away from those black boxes. So that's one of the biggest changes in technology. Is not even a change in technology so much as our approach to how we leverage software and how we make software that plays well with other software.
Nice. Are you familiar with the software defined automation term or concept at all, Cole? It's I'm not going to do it justice here, but we can basically a lot of where the industry is going. Like I'm hearing from companies like Schneider Electric and Aviva that, they're really looking at how do we make things agnostic from hardware? How do we think about software as really like a major competitive advantage and driving the direction that things go? So it sort of falls in line with this, like getting away from the black box. So that's my attempt at defining software-defined automation.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially under the lens of like Ignition. I think Ignition has done a tremendous job of this. They have a rich ecosystem of all these like software modules. It's very open, usable, and I think it's it's changed the conversation.
For sure. Yeah. They're definitely attending the inductive conference. A lot of their focus and a lot of the way they approach development, and they're trying to enable developers using their software. They're looking at like things like Git development, stuff that hasn't historically been accessible to the automation software space. Now they're trying to really modernize, I would say, the approach to development as well as the products themselves.
I knew this was going to be a good conversation, and it certainly has been. I've enjoyed listening. Like, I do not have the engineering background that either of you guys do, but that's part of the reason I enjoy doing these podcasts, is it allows me to talk and learn a little bit more, and hopefully our audience as well. But looking for a manufacturer that's just starting their journey to getting a digital twin, what would the roadmap look like for them?
So what we like to say is start where you are, right? This roadmap is going to look very different based on where you're at and what your industry is. As Cassie was saying, like if you're in like consumer product goods or food and bev, like your roadmap looks different from life sciences, right? So part of it is identifying what you want out of it, like what's actually good and valuable for your business and where you are. What we like to say is start where you are and do incremental growths. So if you try to take on a full like digital twin platform and you're still not even started on your digital transformation, it's going to be a big lift. And so we like to identify these kind of baby step milestones where you can get value out of each step. And as you go farther along that path, you get more and more value. But start where you are. We always like to say depending on where you are, depending on your infrastructure and your maturity, TOT assessments that we do are a really good starting point. Because one thing that we've noticed is as you go along your digital transformation journey, the networking becomes really important. If your network goes down, you're not collecting data anymore. And that's a huge issue. So we like to fortify our clients' networks as well.
I think that leads in nicely to how important is it to have the strong digital backbone or the unified namespace before you can get to your digital twin?
So historically, UNS is relatively new. Under the current understanding, we've built UNSs from scratch. We just didn't know that's what they were called at the time, right? This was before that. But you don't need them to have a digital twin. But how much value you're going to get out of a digital twin without it, you're going to get less and less, right? So the more you adopt these technologies, these practices, the more you're going to get out of the product itself. Are they necessary? No. Do we highly recommend them? Yeah, we do.
Would you say, just on the getting started question too, I know you mentioned the ITOT assessments and kind of the networking, the importance of the data and the infrastructure just to get access to the data. There's also the sort of like understanding the business drivers that you mentioned as well, like what is the value for the clients? Do you feel like feed studies, front end engineering and design are a relevant tool here for clients to navigate this? Cole, what's your take on that?
Yeah. Again, it kind of depends where you are, but one thing that we've noticed too is when you've run it, I mean, automation systems are built to run, 20, 30 years, right? And so when you have 20, 30-year-old tech, you have a way of working that doesn't translate to newer tech stacks, at least not well. And so doing that upfront feed study can really drive decision making for next steps. If you're trying to use a technology that was gone out of existence, 15 years ago, we need to have conversations about that transformation as well. And having all of that kind of eyes wide open up front is really useful.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I personally haven't done a feed study or run a feed study focused on a digital twin per se. I have led a number of feed studies that have answered challenging questions for clients where they're like, how much is this going to cost? Is it really going to drive a return on investment for my business? And where is that return coming from? Then what are the risks and how are we going to get it done? Like those big types of questions for these investments. I think a feed study, it sounds like a lot of the digital twin infrastructure application and return on investment questions, like those can be addressed through a feed. And that could be a place to get started if folks don't know what they need.
Yeah, exactly. Funny enough, right before this, I was actually looking at something. It's a whole software ecosystem that's 22 years old. If my math's not wrong, I usually have computers think for me on that one, but it's about 22 years old and the technologies it was built on don't exist anymore. And there's no upgrade path either. But once I started looking at the system, kind of getting into that feed study portion of it, once I really started looking at the system, a lot of the engineering that they had to do is kind of just free off the shelf now. Mm-hmm. And so you don't even have to account for remaking it. And then it has a bunch of benefits besides because it's such a robust and rich ecosystem now that you get all these benefits and none of the investment in engineering.
Nice.
I definitely think we should hit on what kind of technologies like the IoT and AI or like the game engines that I know have mentioned before are enabling digital twins?
I would say at this point, other than MQTT is like the runaway standard for data transmission. Not required. There's alternatives. There's no reason not to go MQTT right now, though. Another one that's coming up that's pretty common is a protocol built on MQTT, which is called Sparkplug. Sparkplug B is their version, but they're trying to homogenize just a Sparkplug. That's a really common one that's coming up. But MQTT for getting data from point to point in that pub sub methodology, that's a pretty core one. The game engine, although near and dear to my heart, not so much required. I would recommend it for a visual twin because it's nice, but I mean, there's other ways to visually represent your twin. Some people get more value out of a nice Grafana dashboard than they will out of a 3D environment. So you really got to pick what's best for your business and your people. Other than that, you need really just three core pieces. This is going to speak more to the data twin. You need a data source and a way to collect that data. You need a way to store that data, such as like a SQL database or like a time series database historian. And then you need a way to get that data out into your larger, what we sometimes call your data warehouse, data marketplace, data lake, how you want to slice it. Those are the real components to it. Once you have that, you can start interconnecting all these different solutions like we were talking about Base 2 or Ignition or Unity 3D. You start connecting them in almost like a plugin type architecture, but you got to have that core foundation first.
Cole, we talked about having the client had the ability to look at all these multiple sites at one time. So going the whole gamut of it, how would you recommend companies start? Either they're starting small and then being able to scale with the digital twin initiative across multiple locations or maybe even just multiple lines at one time.
So I'm going to do another shameless plug. TOT assessment is a great way to start because the network piece is critical. A lot of sites can still, even to the day, be siloed and isolated from the larger corporate network. And to reap the full benefit of a twin, talking about that end-to-end connectivity, you need it to be able to see the data that's coming from your plant floor all the way up in your business enterprise. And that can get tricky, which is why an ITOT assessment is so great because not everyone, but it's becoming quickly, they separate their OT layer, their operational technology, and their IT layer, their information technology, which is more like your business layer versus your production layer. They separate those and isolate them. And then usually they're joined by like a DMZ, a demilitarized zone. And that can be some pretty complicated IT work to pull that off and make sure everything is connected and stays connected. And so having that architecture, that network architecture, in both in terms of how you manage it and how you set up all the rules and the firewalls and all that good stuff, and in terms of how you physically like wired up and routed your network. Both of those are very important. Network and network bandwidth and data transmission are the most fundamental thing because if network goes down, you have nothing. So that's part of it. And then you want to elevate that data. A lot of times our data stays on the production line or very near to it, right? So like most times it'll elevate from the device itself, say the conveyor, to the HMI, and it'll stop there. But you need to go many more levels up. So the more you can get that operational data into your business layer, the more value you're going to start deriving out of it. And that scaling can be hard, especially if you operate in silos today.
It's fair. Definitely real challenges, but it sounds like there's paths to overcome them.
Absolutely.
What kind of role could that historical data play in a digital twin model?
And so in the best digital backbone, we'll call it, your real-time data becomes your historical data. You can start getting into retention and downsampling with this. But the idea is if you're collecting data every 10 milliseconds, that's a lot of data to store, especially over years and years. So typically you want to downsample it in some way to, maybe minutes. But you lose granularity from the farther you go in the past, the less granular the data becomes, which can be challenging to navigate and find that sweet spot for your business. But so the live data is great for what's going on right now. And historical data is great for like, hey, what happened last week when this alarm went off, right? Let's visualize that. Let's get some insight on that. But your historical data is largely going to drive your things like predictive analytics, like downtime anticipation, mechanical failures and maintenance periods. Like if you can monitor a motor and expect to operate within this hertz range and it's trending up or down too far, then maybe that motor's wearing out and it's time to replace it. Well, your predictive models can start to assess, hey, we know historically that when we see these readings on this type of motor, it needs to be replaced within the week or it's going to fail. So that's driven by historical data. When you also look at your enterprise planning, knowing, hey, I want to produce this many units of product in a week, but I know what every time I've run this SKU, we've only produced 80% of that. That's really important information for enterprise planning, right? So it all lends to those things. The more data you collect, the more decisions you can make.
One of the previous episode, we had Pradeep Paul on talking about manufacturing intelligence, and he had such a great analogy of all data is good, but it just has to be presented in a way, like the right data to the right person, presented in a way that they could use it. But just collecting it all is super important because you don't know what you may be able to look back on, I guess. So many smart people that work here, and I learned so much.
I'll take it one step farther, and this is a challenge that we run into with a lot of our clients, is data design is very important because old programmer adage, garbage in, garbage out, especially true with machine learning models and LLMs. If you just throw any and all data at it and it can't make sense of it, you're going to get a garbage response out. And so having this very concise and purpose-built data design is crucial.
Yeah, and that was going to be like thinking about the data. I immediately had the same thought, Cole, thinking about AI and the future, just kind of looking ahead. Any thoughts on like where things are going in terms of digital twin meets AI? Anything to add we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I would say we've touched on quite a bit of it, but I would say they're parallel technology. So they can work together, but you can have really great AI without a digital twin. Maybe not necessarily without a digital backbone, but without a digital twin for sure. And vice versa is true, right? And so where I see this kind of going, going to, I think the important distinction is, if anybody doesn't know, there's a difference between your machine learning models and your LLM. LLMs are these large language models. They're built on text, websites, blog posts, news articles, face scripts, all these kind of different things to, kind of predict the next word in a sentence type deal. And we've been able to use that to do some tremendous things from that base premise. Whereas your machine learning models are these computational, mathematical things. Yeah. Machine learning models power LLMs, but they're in the billions of machine learning models to power an LLM. And so there's a slight difference here. So when we talk about predictive analytics, predictive maintenance, downtime, that's going to be more driven by your machine learning algorithms than it is LLMs. However, especially with the introduction of MCP protocol, which stands for Model Context Protocol, your ability to make tools such as digital twin tools to work with LLMs to help you find, discover, inquire about like relationships or to ideate in conjunction with your digital twin, that's a real possibility now. And that's very interesting to me.
What would it look like to ideate with a digital twin?
I do this every day. I'd sit there and say, hey, I have an idea, and it spits me out something. And then I was like, I don't like this, but I do like that. And I refine the idea. But one concept that we're working with digital twins is I'm an operator with a digital twin. I know that an alarm just happened. So I can, instead of popping up a database view or clicking a bunch of things in digital twin, I can just say, hey, AI, what just happened? There's an alarm going on. What happened? And if you set up the MCP tooling right, it can get the alarm. It can get potentially any adjoining alarms, like a first out fault type deal. It can look at locality and start to piece together this puzzle. And when you interact with it, like, okay, well, I know this alarm happened. What happened on this machine for the past 10 minutes before that alarm? You start asking all these questions, getting these insights with MCP tools. And this is one that we're playing with right now. What if you could then take all of that kind of discovery work and research that you had and say, okay, capture that in a Grafana dashboard for me so that I can monitor that later. And with MCP tools, it will serve as that medium between the AI and the Grafana to do what it needs to do. And now you just spun up a dashboard. No programming or a setup required. You just told the AI to do it and it did it.
Spiffy. Yeah, that's very
awesome.
cool.
So I have one final question, and I will do some fun questions. So my last industry focused question is, if a manufacturer is kind of hesitant to invest, what's your advice for them to help them prove the value and secure the buy-in from the rest of their team that may also be a little bit hesitant to kind of take the first step or leap down this road?
Yeah, it's going to be start where you are. Start where you are and at least do a feed study. Because when you bring us in, like, we could probably help you identify high impact targets. Because if you're really early in your journey, you want to think tactically. You want to think short-term wins, low cost short-term. Once you have those easy wins out of the way, then you can start thinking strategically as like, okay, how do I leverage this small win into a big win that'll benefit my whole company, not just maybe this line?
That is, I think, very good advice. So now hopefully these will be, again, I call them the fun questions. But if you could automate this is becoming one of my favorite questions. If you could automate one thing in your life, what would it be?
I've thought a lot about this, and all the things that I thought to automate, I wouldn't want to. Like, well, like, what if I could automate my workout so I didn't have to do that every day, right? And I was like, that kind of defeats the point of a workout. And I was like, I spend a lot of time learning, and there's so much new technology every day. It's not even possible to learn it all, right? So if I could get like a matrix style, just jack in and download data, that'd be fantastic.
I love this
That's
answer, Cole. This is a fantastic answer.
That is awesome. That puts mine to shame. I just want it to automate my laundry. And then this is, again, one of my favorite questions to ask. How would you describe your job to a 5-year-old?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that one.
Shoot, I'm
I have
sorry.
tried before. I've tried before. I'm really bad at it. I don't know. So I've said I'm a puppet master of computers in the past. I say I make video games for manufacturing lines. Most of that is lost on a 5-year-old.
I think that's a good answer. Video games for manufacturing. That sounds cool. I want to play. So my last question, and this just helps us kind of keep an eye on what's going on and what our engineers are interested in learning about. So what else would you like to see us cover on future episodes of Beyond Tech?
I would love to spend more time talking about MCP. I'm calling our MCP toolkit right now, but the ability to make up new MCP tools that work with AI to just make your life easier and like a plug-in, like drop in and go type way. We're doing quite a few things kind of behind the scenes with it. Nothing we're really talking about broadly, but it's a really cool standard. There's a lot of investment in it from Anthropic and OpenAI. It's really cool. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with it.
Well, I think you just volunteered yourself for another episode. I guess I'll also just, is there anything else that you would like to add or that we didn't touch on, or anything else you would like to say?
There's some really cool technologies coming out for digital twins. In the past, we've always made like a custom digital twin for our clients that is purpose built, which is great and has tremendous benefit, but it also can be expensive depending on how far they want to take it. Jensen from NVIDIA made an announcement a few weeks ago where they showed their NVIDIA Omniverse powered by Siemens Accelerator, I think it was called. We started looking into it. It's incredible what they've been able to accomplish. I'm hoping to get my hands on it. I don't know if they're releasing it to the market yet, but I'm hoping to get on that. It's really cool what they've done. Seems really promising.
That's awesome. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Cole, for spending some time with us, helping me and hopefully the audience learn a little bit more. Thanks for being with us today.